Hello and good day. I hope your last week went well. This is Eric Redmond from the state of Idaho Legislative discussing the last week, the Idaho session from February 2nd through the 6th. I'm going to start out from a word from Jesus Calling by Sarah Young, taken from Scriptures as if God is speaking to you. Come to me for rest and refreshment. The journey has been too much for you and you are bone weary. Do not be ashamed of your exhaustion. Instead, see it as an opportunity for me to take charge of your life. Remember that I can fit everything into a pattern for good, including the things you wish were different. Start with where you are at this point in time and space, accepting that this is where I intend you to be. You will get through today, one step, one moment at a time. Your main responsibility is to remain attentive to me, letting me guide you through the many choices along your pathway. This sounds like an easy assignment, but it is not. Your desire to live in my presence goes against the grain of the world, the flesh, and the devil. Much of your weariness results from your constant battle against these opponents. However, you are on the path of my choosing, so do not give up. Hope in me, for you will again praise me for the help of my presence. Romans 8:28. We are assured to know that God, being a partner in their labor, all things work together and are fitting into a plan for good to and for those who love God and are called according to his design and purpose. This last week I met with several elected officials from Kootenai County, some briefly, some for a longer discussion. Rod Tweet of the Lakes Highway District, Steve Matheson, the Kootenai County Treasurer, Mark Eberlein, Kootenai County Commissioner, Casey Mesa, a Regional Director of Kootenai Medical Services for the 10 most northern counties of northern Idaho, Dave Munger from Hayden Lake, who is the Idaho State Legislative Chair for the Idaho Association of Health Underwriters, of which I was a former president of the North Idaho Health Underwriters. Also, there was two former Idaho Health Underwriter state presidents, Scott Levitt and Tom Shores. Tom is now the state Idaho Health Exchange Board Director. Scott was a former president of the National Association of Health Underwriters. Carrie Spears came up from Crarewood. She was a director on the Board of Aging. And as always, I met with many lobbyists who represent various businesses, organizations, and even state boards. As a citizen legislator, these are all important meetings for us to find out information for both those for and against a bill or rule. There was a very tasty free pie social put on by the Idaho homeschoolers on the fourth floor of the Rotunda in the Capitol. They had many presentations besides of homeschool projects they had done. We had a House Republican caucus to discuss Idaho transportation, roads and bridges, financing. There are many ideas on how to get the near $262 million we are behind in transportation infrastructure costs just for maintenance. I am convinced there will be monies appropriated from somewhere this session, and there has to be. The Idaho Department of Transportation is operating very lean and very effective at the lowest budget it can for administration, but now we need the funds just to keep up with crucial maintenance. We also briefly discussed the Article 5 Constitutional Convention of the states regarding the federal spending and debt crisis, the regulatory crisis, the congressional attacks on state sovereignty, and the federal takeover of the decision-making process. The House leadership is moving towards joining the other states specifically for a balanced budget constitutional amendment. Now again, 2/3 of the states have to agree on this, and they're looking at putting sideboards on it, so it can only be this. There's not some other areas that will come into a potential amendment. I've seen the Heritage Foundation's information for this, along with the John Birch Society, which is opposed to it. There mostly was certainly would be more discussion on this. On Tuesday, I was asked and was honored to give the morning prayer at the beginning of the session because our regular house chaplain was out of town. Again, that was a blessing for me. We took our individual photos that same day for the large picture that will hang in the Capitol of all the 2015 legislators. Those are interesting photos and pictures because, I mean, there are some with back to the, I believe they can go back as far as the 30s, for sure the 40s and 50s of the legislators of that time. I met with a couple of moms who had what is called cottage food businesses. They have a bill which I'm in favor of so that they can, for instance, bake cookies, cupcakes, or freeze-dried soups out of their homes without having to have a commercial kitchen. They can still have a health and welfare food safety department inspector come by their homes and make sure that everything is clean and proper enough at their home. Alta Mesa had a breakfast with an update on their oil and natural gas drilling. Remember, they're drilling in Payette County, and they're from Texas. They had an explanation of how they make payments to landowners when they lease their mineral rights. When they are drilling on private land, there may be someone that might be opposed to it, but if the drilling is not on their property, but it could possibly be pulling natural gas from under their land, they are still going to pay them the percentage that they would anyone else. And of course, if more landowners are opposed to it, then they wouldn't be able to put the drill in. But it's a very money-making program, with Idaho being the 35th state to have natural gas. They're still working on their infrastructure to get it out. And of course, they're staying away from the BLM because it takes too long in approvals, with the environmental impact statements requiring, along with possible holdups because of various left-wing environmental lawyer lawsuits. I also attended a private water adjudication meeting just for the Northern Idaho legislators, put on by the Idaho Deputy Attorney General in charge of the Idaho adjudication. There was to be a court hearing on Friday, February 6th in Twin Falls, with the many objections from Northern Idaho water users and with the claims by several federal agencies, including the Bureau of Indian Affairs, which they're there for the American Indian tribes of Northern Idaho. They expect that this will probably be an ongoing court case for 2 to 5 years or more. I met with Chairman Wood of our Health and Welfare Committee, along with 2 other of our first-term legislators, to go over the best methods of presenting a bill to the House. All bills have to be brought to the House by a representative, and of course in the Senate by a senator. Even a Senate bill coming to the House needs to be brought to the House by a representative, not a senator. Likewise, the same of a House bill going to the Senate needs to be brought by a senator. Anyway, we 3 first-timers have bills begun by the Board of Pharmacy and approved by our Health and Welfare Committee. Although they are simple, technical bills, we still have to present them to the House to be voted on. Therefore, we have to learn the details and research them enough to answer most questions that might come up from different House legislators. It ought to be interesting. I think that'll be coming up Monday. How do bills originate? Well, they start out with what we call a RS, and that's where only the presenter has it. It's his property, so there's nothing printed on it, because if it doesn't go through, we can't say what it was or anything. He keeps it, and maybe he'll bring it back at a later date. The Speaker and leadership place him in the committees, and where they believe where the potential bill should begin. From there, the chairman first, then the committee, listen and vote on whether that bill should be printed to come back to the committee for more discussions as a true bill, once it gets a number, and for the public or any interested parties to discuss if they're against it. If the bill is approved, then it goes to what is called the second reading before the whole House. That is so the representatives know that they should be reading this prospective new bill because it will come before the House. Usually it comes before the House the next day. Then on the third reading in the House, it is brought to the chamber and discussed for or against, and the legislators vote on the bill. My Health and Welfare Committee had a presentation by the director of that department, his staff, Director Armstrong. They discussed, the committee, or the Special Task Force discussed the 185-page Governor's Task Force on Medicaid expansion. They call it Healthy Idaho, an alternative to Medicaid expansion. Of course, it still is the federal Medicaid program, but they hope to receive a waiver to transform the delivery system to a patient-centered model rather than the usual fee-for-service. I'm overall not for expanding Medicaid, even with their ideas of hoping to receive a waiver for a more patient-physician health outcome plan over the normal fee-for-service activity. I do believe in the direct primary care, non-insurance type plans, but not tied to the federal Medicaid expansion. They were discussing with a waiver that maybe they could charge co-pays. The problem is the feds will only let them charge like a copay of $3 to $5, which is no deterrent to overuse of Medicaid services. There is a fact that more physicians are refusing to accept Medicaid these days because it pays so low. That's what the other insurance plans have to make up for, poor pay from the federal government plan, which is Medicaid, Medicare. We are considering expanding it so that we have even more patients with fewer physicians. You know, there was a time in my earlier years when I did not have medical insurance because I could not afford it. But I do not think able-bodied, childless working adults should be on Medicaid. It was created for the vulnerable, the low-income, elderly, the blind or disabled, and low-income families. Many states like Washington State next door, they have expanded it, set up a budget on how many Medicaid new enrollees they estimated would be on the expansion, and later found out it doubled their estimate, which even with the feds paying what they do, there's more administration costs, along with, again, fewer doctors accepting it. The tests were show all kinds of projected costs and taxpayer savings over 10 years. When I see projections of truly unknowns, I think of Obamacare, where it was projected to reduce medical costs and save us all kinds of monies. Now we know it's more expensive, costs have gone up even more, and is not, and even a lot of the insureds that supposedly are going to come on aren't there anymore. Did you know that Obamacare's beginning Medicaid expansion has mostly been paid for by cutting $760 billion from seniors' Medicare benefits? The Commerce and Human Resource Committee here we heard a presentation by several organizations representing the Idaho firefighters regarding occupational diseases, more particularly cancer, they believe caused by smoke and transference through their skin of the synthetic products burning that are in homes and buildings nowadays, whereas the fires used to be primarily from natural products like wood, etc. I'm on board with that coverage with proper verifications that the cancer was not from smoking, chewing, or some other cause. You might have heard about the bill being introduced to the State Affairs Committee regarding the Second Amendment constitutional carry, where anyone in Idaho would have the right to have a concealed weapon without a permit. If you go to other states, you very well might have to take a class and have a permit, receive a permit. There are 4 states that have that constitutional carry right now. Lastly, on Friday, there was a media press conference discussing the transfer of public lands committee results. The joint chairman of that committee expressed that they are not going to insist the federal government give them the public lands as Utah has, but they are still seeking the Congress to move that way. It has been very evident that the national forests have not been managed well at all. The state lands are much better managed. The committee is now considering a $500,000 study to determine how best to manage those federal lands. They expressed the University of Idaho study that came out earlier was very poorly done. Utah had an 18-month study done by 3 of their universities, costing around $600,000, and it did show that Utah would be $100 million to the better, even at the beginning of their receiving their public lands, and that includes fire control. They have 65% of their land owned and managed by the feds, whereas we have around 62% owned by the federal government. Well, this has been a longer discussion in this chat than before, which comes from more legislative review. With the weeks coming up, it will likely become even more complex and more bills to be researched in a shorter time period. Thank you for you tuning into my YouTube, and may God bless you and your family and this year, and may God bless our state, and may return our nation to the republic government God inspired the constitutional framers' design. Thank you, and goodbye.